Where was my father born? My father was born.
Don't get nervous.
No, but my father was born. I'm hoping I'm talking about.
No, you don't have to talk about
My
it.
father was born in Lublin, Poland.
Yeah.
My mother was born in a small community someplace. The name was Krylov. Whether the pronunciation is right or not, I don't know, but that's the way my mother pronounced it.
But that was in Poland. Both of them Poland.
Yes, they both were born in Poland. Now my father's father was quite well off. Mm-hmm. He had a bakery. He had an Anvorhaus, which is like a motel for transients to come and stay overnight or as long as they did business. And he sold to business and whatever he did. And one day one of the workmen came and told him that the mill wasn't working. He went to see what was wrong, and when he bent over, somebody pushed him from the back, and he started to yell, and he got all that flour in his lungs.
Now we're going to record.
Oh.
Now go ahead.
On his way home, coughing, he dropped dead. He was picked up from the street. My father was a very young child, 3 years old, and he was very frightened by it. And whenever he saw the men, because they took him and they buried him right away, he always feared these men. But he grew up. My grandmother sent him to Cheder or whatever it was. He had 2 brothers, and I think it was 2 sisters. One was Rivka. I don't know what the other one's name was, but Rivka, I know one. And these 2 brothers were very well educated. My mother's sister, my Aunt Esther, always said that they were so well educated that if they were in America, they would have been very big rabbis. But they wasn't so good to my grandmother. Politely and Pamelchen, they took over the business, they took over everything, and they pushed out to the extent that she had to sit in the that's in a marketplace, and peddle bagels, rolls, bread, whatever it was. She had a push cart. And she supported herself that way. And in the meantime, I forgot where I am. I forgot. Hold on for a minute.
Okay.
He had a wife and 2 children, 2 boys. One was named after his father, Herschel, and I don't know what the other one was named.
That was Harry.
Harry. And he was
that's
divorced.
supposed to be the skeleton.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
And he was divorced from his wife, and then he was married I don't know how long after that, but from the time he divorced his wife until he married my mother, one of the children died. Herschel, I think, was the oldest one, but I'm not sure. One of them was left alive. That was Herschel.
Yeah.
He married my mother with this one child, and then he gave birth to your mother. And he bought himself a saloon, a tavern, whatever you want to call it. But in Poland, being a Jew, he couldn't keep it on his name. He had to get some goy that would take it on his name, and he paid him off a certain amount. And things was very good with my mother. She had everything she wanted because, pardon me, I got it down. The Pritzum, the people used to come into the saloon to barter. And they used to bring all sorts of things, hand crocheted, hand knitted, everything, aprons, pillowcases, bedclothes, whatever you wanted, they brought in. And she, in turn, used those and gave them some schnapps or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And she had the finest of butter and eggs and milk and everything. And then Frida was born. No, Meyer was born.
Yeah, my mother was the oldest. Then,
that's right. She had it very good as a child.
And then Meyer.
Then Meyer was born, and she still had it good.
And then Frida.
And then Frida. And every time she had to renew these licenses for the saloon or tavern, whatever it was, they had to pay this guy off, and he kept his mouth shut. And a couple of times they'd come in, and Mama would quick dump the liquor out and close it out, and they'd fine him.
Yeah.
But then shortly after Charlie, this happened twice, and they gave him a warning that if it happened the 3rd time, they'd put him in jail and throw the key away. Charlie was an infant at the time.
Charlie was born in Europe?
Sure.
Oh, Charlie.
Charlie was an infant. I think he was 2 years old when she brought him here, 2.5, something of that sort. And Papa saw things were very bad. He didn't care what it cost him to pay off the man, but when it came to send him to jail, he was afraid. So he and Mama decided that they would sell it, and with the money, they would go to America. My father went back to visit my mother and didn't mention that he was going to Europe. Didn't want to hurt her. To America. Didn't want to hurt her feelings. But after he went away to Europe, his brothers,
to America.
His brothers very nicely told him about it, and she cried and carried on, but there was nothing.
You mean he left without telling?
He went to visit her.
Oh.
And he visited her, but he didn't tell her he said goodbye to her, but he didn't say he was going to America.
Oh, I see.
Didn't want to hurt her. Anyway, after she went away, he found out about it. They got on a train. They started for America. And after they rode...
Your father was already in America?
No, my father...
Oh, your father...
Both of them, they sold this saloon or tavern, whatever it was, and they got on a train.
Yeah.
And after he got on the train, and they stopped at one place, they had to go over another granite's, whatever, boundary line.
Yeah.
Then they had to... Papa took out his money and started figuring with Mama how much it was going to cost them to get to the place where the boat sailed, otherwise they wouldn't have enough money. They figured out that they didn't have enough for both of them, for all of them to go together with the children. So they decided that he would go on to America, and he would get in touch with his brothers to help her out, to take care of her until he could send. These brothers very nicely ignored her and the children. He left them where the boat was to sail, which was a big city. And my mother had no way of earning a living. Charlie was nursing. The other children were small. So she plucked chickens, she plucked turkeys, whatever there was to pluck. She was a wet nurse. She nursed strange children. She did everything under the sun that she could to support these children. She had a very hard time. She had no house, she had no place to go. And she used to tell how one time...
Go ahead.
One time, she was on the road and she saw an old barn or something. And she sneaked in with Harry and Bella.
She had Harry?
Harry was with her, sure. Harry and Bella and Meyer and Frida and Charlie, with 5 little bits of children. She was a very young woman yet. She married, she was 16. And right away she conceived, so she was very young, because she was 29 years old when she came to America. So she saw this barn, and she went into it with the children. This one was sleepy and that, and she was herself. So she says to the woman, could she stay overnight? The next day she'd move on something. So the woman says, I don't mind if you stay on, but don't tell anybody. So she went in, and whatever they had to eat, whatever they carried along from the few pennies she made, she stayed. During the night, the children were hungry, and they were cold. They had nothing to cover up or anything, and they cried, and the husband heard that crying, and he wanted to know what it was. So his wife says, go to sleep, forget about it. It's a parashigidana. Let her stay overnight. He says, no, you don't. They're disturbing my sleep. At midnight or whatever time it was, she and the children capsized on till they got some place, and they begged a little coffee or they begged something from the restaurants, because they were in a bigger city already, you understand? So they begged these food, they got the things together, and then one told the other they could need a serving girl, they could need this, and she would leave the children because somebody needed to mind the children. She had no place. But Meyer was very alert. He was very protective of them. And she would run back and forth, and as long as she had the few pennies, then she'd ask the people she lived from, maybe they had a place where she could live on, where she could lay on it overnight. And she did that for a whole year. She traveled on from one place to another. And it's a long, long year like that there. But my father came to America in New York City. And when he came to New York City, they were laying the sewers for New York City. They had those big, what do you call those big nut tanks? What do they call those big
pipes?
Pipes, those real big ones. And in order to pay $1 a week for a room, he didn't pay it. He wanted to save that dollar to send for Mama. So he would sleep in these things. It was in the summertime. So he slept, but they had to throw the rats off. The rats were in New York, where these things were laying, but anyway, they did. And I think you know in time what an immaculate man he was.
Yeah.
So he did, but it was very hard for him. As winter moved in, he lived in a moving van. The reason for a moving van was because there was old blankets and things that they used for the furniture. Everything so that the dollar would save. He got maybe $1 a day or 50 cents, whatever it is. Somebody told him that in Newark he would get a hatter. The greenhorns are gone to hatters. And you get $1 a day there. So he came to America. They wrote it down for him. He came across the ferry.
Came to Newark.
He came to Newark. And he lived in Boston Street or one of those streets up there.
Yeah.
And he got a hatter for $7 a week. And he lived in some place, maybe in a basement or someplace, very little. Finally, he went to the, agent. And you didn't pay all at once. You paid installment. When he wrote to my mother...
How could he find her?
Well, wait a minute. He wrote to my mother, and he couldn't find her. The brothers didn't know. They didn't answer him or anything. So she was known all over as the Polish Yidina. She must have been a good-looking woman. She was tall and thin, ausgemattet, with these 5 children. So all the neighborhoods, everybody knew. So somebody in the rabbi got a letter from Papa. Did they know where a woman was with 5 children, a description of her and everything? If it is so, he wants to send a ship's cart to bring her to America. So when this rabbi got it, he asked all over, and they finally got her, and the rabbi read it to her and told her, and of course by the time they answered, that time they came by boats, and boats cost 3-4 months at a time to come back and forth. It didn't like a week like today.
Well, did somebody want to buy her?
Well, wait a minute. In the meantime, while Papa was making a few dollars and getting ready, she was starving. So somebody told her that there was a pritza, which was a princess or whatever the pritza was, and they liked, what's her name, Frida. She was a wet nurse, she was everything. But they took a liking to Frida, so they went to this priest, and they says if she had some money to pay for this woman, they could buy the child from her. It was a beautiful child. She saw the child, and she wanted Bella.
Frida.
They wanted Frida. And they dickered back and forth. She didn't want to give it, but she felt very bad that she figured at least let her live. They were starving, they couldn't.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Meyer says, whatever it's going to be with all of us will be with her too. Don't give her away. In the meantime, this priest fell in love with her so much that she took and she outfitted her. Because she was willing to do it. But Sarah, she listened to Meyer. Bella, they started to cry, and they didn't want to give her up. They were old enough. Yeah. See, Charlie didn't understand. Anyway, to make the story short,
You've got lots of time.
Papa's ship's cart came, and she landed to America. And in that, he had an apartment finished. Cold water flat. The pump was in the yard, the toilet was in the yard, and he bought a black bureau, was painted, paint over paint. I remember it for years after that we had it. And this thing with the grapes, do you see that?
Oh my goodness.
Can they hear it?
Yeah.
This here thing was 19 cents. 2 of those on the top of the bureau for decorations was 19 cents a piece. Many years after that, Frida broke when her mom almost killed her for that. Okay, now, when they landed in America, my father had gotten so thin that my mother didn't recognize him and he didn't recognize her. But Bella, your mother, says, Mama, dort is in der Tata. Dort is, she could only talk Jewish.
They would talk in English, too.
Yeah, but in der Tata they would understand. That is our father. And of course, the other children recognized him, and he took them to Newark, because that was in Ellis Island.
Yeah.
They brought him to Newark, and that's where he lived here. $7 a week was fine. In the meantime, as soon as he had a few dollars and there was a job, he sent for Mr. Gruber, my mother's brother. He was a young fellow. He left his wife and children
in
there.
other words, Grandma's maiden name was Gruber.
Gruber, yes.
And she had a sister, Esther.
Esther,
That
well,
was
she
Esther
came
Katz.
later.
Yeah.
So she came, Nathan Gruber came to America, and Papa broke him in to be America, and he was a boarder in Mama's house. And then they brought Mendel Tuck over. And he also made a hat out of him. Mama had a boarder, but he was so tight. See, Nathan Gruber, her brother, he was more generous. That time, meat was 6 cents a pound. So all she could afford was a pound for herself. But when she was a customer that could buy a pound of meat, things were so bad, she had these 2 boarders, another half a pound of meat. So with that, she already got bones, piece of lung, a piece of liver, a piece of everything thrown in. And rice, barley, and all those things were 4 cents a pound. So she bought for 2 cents of this and 2 cents of that, and she made a pot of soup. She had the bones, and the children, her father, had the meat. My uncle, Mr. Gruber, he took the piece of meat with the soup and different things, and that was all right. Papa went to New York on Sunday morning with 2 big pillowcases, because there were no Jewish bakery. Mm-hmm. He had 2 big bakeries, and he came off and took her across the ferry, into Jersey City, across the ferry. Then he walked to New York to the bakery on the way back until he got on the ferry to come back. And he came home with 2 big bags of stale rolls, bread, whatever they threw in. And that was 25 cents a roll. And when they brought that home, Mama would sprinkle a little water on, and they'd put it in the oven to freshen it up. And that's what they ate with this meat and everything. They had a good meal. But Mendel Tuck was a quarter of a pound, because you got a half a pound for the 2 of them. It shrunk up. Yeah. And when you gave him a quarter of a pound of meat, he took it on his fork and he turned it this way and that way. Is that a quarter of a pound? Is that a quarter of a pound? Is it all the rice or the barley or whatever it was? She couldn't make a penny on him. She, on the other hand, couldn't afford shoes or anything, so she had old shoes from them. So she wore the old shoes. And things were very, very hard. She would take an old dress, a dress somebody would give them, or they'd buy a dress the first time they came. She would take the dress apart and cut it out and sew it by hand, and that's the way they had to live, from hand to mouth. It was very difficult. One day, they were building a big shul in Newark, and they came to her. Oh, they had a big job for her. They finished the shul, and it was winter time, and they were hurrying to get it ready for Pesach. They gave her the job to scrub it. They had whitewashed it, and all that white stuff was all over the floors. And it was an Orthodox shul, upstairs and downstairs. It was a big thing.
Where was this?
In Newark someplace. I don't know where. And anyway, she went to work. It was cold, no heat in the place, cold winter time, with cold water and everything. She scrubbed it and everything, and she came for her money. So they told her that she had earned a mitzvah. But she says she needed the money. She needed it. They said, you got such a big mitzvah, you don't need money. And that's the thank you she got for that. So that was that. To make the long story short, Papa got a few dollars together, and he bought her a gold chain with a watch. That was, he loved her, and he wanted to give her something. So
instead of food, or you bought it?
Well, there was food from mouth, food to mouth.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Nuta and Mendel and Papa and Harry was a big boy already. They pooled each $1 or $2 together, and they opened a hat shop themselves. And they worked together. But when it came the end of the week, they had men working too. They couldn't pay, Papa couldn't pay his bills. So he would pawn that watch and chain every week. And by the time people paid him for his stuff, it was time to get it out again. It was time to put it in again, and that was the way it was. Finally, after she gave birth to Jenny, she opened a grocery store. It was very little, very little. They lived next in the back of the rooms.
That was now Ferry Street.
No. This was up in Boston or Wycliffe Street.
Oh, up
Oh,
on the hill.
yes. And it was all spoken Jewish, because all the neighbors
Yeah.
was Jewish,
Yeah.
so it fitted in all right. And the few pennies that Papa brought in, she bought merchandise, and they transferred, and, it was that way. One day, the toilet was in the yard. It was a heavy snow. And Meyer, on his way to the toilet, took his pisher out and walked along the snow in the yard and made designs. The landlady lived upstairs, and she says, she hoped his who's this would rotten off for doing a thing like that. She cursed him. Mama felt very bad because she had lost a child with diphtheria.
Grandma did?
Yes, she lost a 7-year-old boy.
Oh, I
His name
never
was
knew.
Moshe.
I never knew that.
Yeah, during the time they had this business in Europe
Oh.
for diphtheria, he died, Moshe. And then your mother was first, then this Moshe, then Meyer. So when anybody cursed her Meyer after losing this boy,
Yeah.
she says to my father, she says, we must get out of here. We must get out. And that's when they moved down. Wait a minute, I forgot to tell you, while they lived up there, Charlie got pneumonia. And he was very sick. And there was a dispensary down on Broad Street. Do you know where the Center Market was?
Yes.
And there was a Sure grocery store there, downstairs, and then upstairs was the dispensary. She must have been pregnant with Abby. And on the way down by the courthouse, they were selling half of oranges because half was rotten. So they cut halves or quarters, and you paid a penny a piece for them. She was pregnant, and she felt like something. So she bought an orange, and it was so rotten it was not cut away. And she was sick down the stomach. She vomited all the way down to the dispensary at Broad Street. She walked all the way down from Wycliffe Street down to Broad Street to over there. You know where that is.
Up near Prince Street, way up.
Yeah, but all the way down to Broad Street and all the way over. And she came all the way up, and they gave her medicine for Charlie. And when they brought the medicine home, before she got ready to give it to him, Meyer drank the medicine up.
Oh my, the whole thing?
Yeah, he took the bottle, he put it to his mouth, and he drank it.
Oh my God.
But she had nothing to give him, so she suffered along with him.
Could have killed him.
They could have, but it didn't. However, got through, but he was very sickly all the time. Well, however, meantime, Jenny was born. Meantime, Abby was born. She moved down to Ferry Street. The reason she moved down to Ferry Street because Papa couldn't hold on to the hat shop. He had to get rid of that, and he went to work for Pat Riley.
Tannery.
Yes, and in that corner, Lexington and Ferry Street, is where the store was, and Riley was the landlord. It was Riley's row of red brick houses, 3 stories, and they opened this moved this grocery store. Wait, before they did that, wait a minute. No, it was after. They moved down to Ferry Street, and while at Ferry Street, they started to make a few dollars. Papa worked for $7 a week. It was very difficult. He was short. And in Pat Riley's, the Irishman that worked with Papa, they had to work 2 shifts. And they had these leathers stretched out in big things. And naturally, that big fella carried all the weight down on Papa. And so he complained about that, and they put him in another place where there was vitriol, and they had to wash those. And his stomach so burnt it was raw flesh. He was short and everything splashed. He was unhandy doing it, period. However, to make the long story short, he did that there. In the meantime, Harry went to work in a cigarette place. No, he did not. He went to work I don't know where. And your mother went to work in Wiss at a foot press for $3 a week. And Meyer went to work, but he did not want to work for anybody. He worked, and the boss told him to do this and do that. He wanted to do it his way, Meyer that way. And Papa, he came home with all sorts of excuses. So, meantime, she was pregnant with Eddie. She had Eddie, and then she got pregnant with me. and she was making a fairly living in the store. She took care of it all day, but in the evening Papa came home, and that was it. They bought a cow, and they rented a place. Oh, wait a minute. Before that, they opened a grocery store on Pearl Street, right near Washington Street. Because Meyer couldn't work for anybody, so Meyer and your mother ran that store. And now the Wieners, Miriam Wieners, was later on married to Frederick J. Well, anyway, this J's, they had 7 or 8 children. And they didn't make much of a living. The father didn't. But she wasn't fussy. She took on the book and didn't pay. And a couple of others, and the first thing you know, Papa was out of business for Bella and Meyer. So they were back in Ferry Street again and doing that there. So then they bought 1 cow or 2 cows, and they rented a barn from Faye's. Now you remember where Ferry Street was? Down to Lentz Avenue, right near Horatio Street, where Faye's lived.
A farm there.
The other end was closed, was farm, Horatio Street.
That's right.
But Lentz Avenue, where it ended at the end, they had this here. And they found a little profit. They bought a second-hand wagon, and they started to go around peddling the milk. For that, Meyer was handy. And Frida, she was growing up, they went on this route. And the first thing you know, Papa never milked a cow. He wasn't handy at it, but and your mother didn't. She wasn't handy at milking a cow. So she worked. But Mama and Meyer and Frida, they walked from Lexington and Ferry Street down to Lentz Avenue at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. They had a milk and sent it out. Nobody had refrigeration. And milk was 4 cents a quart. But with all their work in it, and then the afternoon was another route. You had to wash the bottles and do everything. And gradually they got up to 9 cows. And they had 2 milk wagons. When suddenly there was a fire. They were just beginning to live, and they had this fire. Burnt the barn down where Faye's did. Insurance they didn't have. They were out. But they went to Kearney to where Bull's Heads, where the auction place was. There was a man by the name of Blake. And he gave them a few cows on installment. He had pity on them, gave them for installment, and they had another little barn there, and they worked along with that. And the first thing you know, with the store and with the milk route, they made a few dollars, and then they built 82 Vincent Street. But before they built it, they built a barn. There was an old barn, a little barn on the other side, where the horses were kept later on. But in this first barn, they kept and they started buying cows and building the big one until they had 60 cows.
Did have that many?
Yes, they had 3 milk routes. Charlie had one, and Jenny used to go with Charlie. Meyer, I don't know if they did that there. And they started to make a good living. Are you running short?
No, go right ahead.
They went on with this milk route, and they were making good money. And they moved to Vincent Street, and Papa was out. He washed the bottles. He washed them, and he filled the bottles and the cans, strained the milk.
Whatever happened to Harry in the meantime?
Harry worked. In the meantime, he got to be 17 or 18 years old. He got married.
Oh, he did get married.
He got married.
To the Teuber family?
No, let me tell you. He didn't get married to Fanny. No, he didn't. In the meantime, I forgot to tell you, Mama brought Sarah Tuck to America. And Moshe Koch was a man. I forgot, this is a long story. After my mother's side, my grandfather, when my grandmother died, he remarried a woman, and she told him on her deathbed not to marry this one, that she would mean to her children. But she made herself up to him, and he didn't listen. In 30 days he married. Mama was married to Papa. From the distance she heard about it. There was nothing she could do. He had a son. She had a son. And she didn't want him to associate with Mama before she got married, because he was dark and she was dark and the children would be dark. But she liked Sarah. for a daughter-in-law, because not Sarah, Esther.
Esther Katz.
Because Esther was very pretty, and she was blonde with blue eyes.
Yeah.
But this guy was a stupid guy, and Esther did not like him. But she was forced into it. Her father died, and she had nobody, so she had to do what the stepmother told her to do. She married him, and she was with him one night, and she rebelled. She would not live with him. She came to Mama, wherever Mama lived, because she couldn't go back to the stepmother. And then she went to an aunt or somebody, because Mama couldn't keep her either. So she went to an aunt or somebody, and there they brought a shidduch for her. It was Moshe Katz. His name was Katz. Papa always said it wasn't Katz, it was Katz, like his name was C-A-C-H.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. And he was much older than her. He had children as old as she was.
Yeah.
When my father, in the distance wherever he was, when he heard that she was going to get married, he jumped. He liked her. As a child, he liked her, didn't want that. He carried on terrible, but she had no home, she had nothing. She married him. And how did he make his living? He was a mooser. What is a mooser? A squealer. He made his living from a squealer. If a man wanted to divorce his wife, he went to Moshe Katz and gave him a few rubles, whatever it was, and told her to varfna get. You brought her, you tricked her. Came to visit, shook hands, and you handed her the get. She was divorced. And Papa knew that, and he didn't want her, but she was married to him, and that's all. In the meantime, some of his children came to Philadelphia, and they brought him. And then they brought her to Philadelphia. And Moshe Katz had nothing to do. He was a roamer. His children supported him. Harry acquainted himself with one of his daughters and went to Philadelphia, where she was, left Papa and Mama, went to Philadelphia, never married, or if he did marry, I don't know. Married, he was very young, and she was very young, and they lived together a very short time, and he came back home. She never divorced him, he never divorced her. She remarried, had grown-up children already. He married the Toiba.
Toiba Fanny.
Yes. Never divorced his first wife, and she never divorced her husband. That was dissolved like that.
Yeah.
Period. And in the meantime, he would come home to live. And what would he do? He made $3 a week or $5 a week, so he gave Papa a few dollars. But he used so much cigarettes and packing his lunch and everything that Papa says to him, "You're eating up my profits. I can't afford to keep you. You're making money. Pay me for the cigarettes. Do that." So he left house, and he went and he married Toiba. And he became a hatter.
Well, that's where Louis calls the skeleton.
No, wait a minute. No,
Yeah.
that's not the skeleton yet.
Yeah.
And he became a hatter, and he was a damn good hatter. And he used to make, that time, $25 a week. And the Toiba, they rented a house, apartment, and that stove shone. They never cooked anything on the stove. You cooked it on anything, a plate or anything. She didn't polish a stove. She was a lady. When she came, I was born. That's when he got married, when I was born. And when she came to Ferry Street, she didn't hear even in her younger days, Shvika, Shvika.
Yeah.
She carried on that Shvika. She didn't like the way Mama was living, but Mama couldn't have lived, so they lived differently. However, they had a hell of a good time. At that time, they used to go to Coney Island over the weekend on the boat, and they danced for all they was worth. And Monday or Tuesday, they came back, they didn't have $1. So he used to come to Papa to lend, and Papa wouldn't lend him $1 because he spent it that way. He didn't help or anything. So they were a little bit estranged. He didn't come, and they lived for himself, never had any children with her. Later on, they've been married a long, long time, maybe 15, 20 years. No, I don't think I was that old. No, I must have been younger than that. Sure, I must have been maybe 15, 16 years old. And finally, he located his mother. His mother located him. She had remarried once or twice since divorcing my father. And with one of these men that she married, she had a child, a daughter. And Harry was a good Samaritan. He sent for the daughter, sent for the mother. I don't know. I was very young. Pardon me, I didn't understand what it was all about. Anyway, brought her to America, and apparently she was very pretty. And that was his sister, and he took her into his house. They lived on Jones Street, and they took her out dancing, and they treated her and everything. And the first thing you know, they fell in love with one another, and she became pregnant. When she became pregnant, Toiber found out. She wanted him arrested, and she did arrest him. And Meyer came to Papa, and Papa wanted nothing to do with him. Well, anyway, get the hate, schlecht hate. Papa had a pony up to get him out on bail, and that time it was $50 bail or $25, whatever it was. Meyer's sister took him down to Penn Station and gave him $25 and $50, I don't know. That time was a lot of money. And says, get the hell out of here. Go to Canada. Otherwise she'll throw you in jail and you won't be able to get out of it. And he took this gal along with him. And he was there a few months when all of a sudden one day he comes back. He needed money. Papa wouldn't have, Papa chased him. He'd go to jail. He says, you're no good, go to jail. Anyway, Meyer took him again to the Penn Station and says, look, get the hell out of here and stay and don't ever come back, which he did. And there he had 3 or 4 or 5 children. I don't know how many children. And that was the skeleton. That's Louis' skeleton.
That's Louis' skeleton.
But he probably heard talk of that from his father. But other than that, what did he know?
Yeah.
He knew nothing about it. But that's the story. Now, I want to stop it for a minute. My throat's a little dry.
That's what I...
Okay. When your father and mother were getting married, and Papa and Mama took stock of what they had in this grocery store, and they bought from the different people that supply the food.
The suppliers.
The suppliers, up to $500.
My father came from
Philadelphia.
Scranton, I think.
Was it Scranton? I don't know, someplace.
Scranton,
Yeah, he
Pennsylvania.
came there, and I remember he had a big trunk.
I don't know.
I remember, and you know what he had in that trunk? Was that trunk landed down on Vincent Street in our cellar. And he had pink shirts. He had shirts with ruffles. He had such, like they're wearing now, these fancy shirts. And I never saw that from our boys. I only saw that from your father. He brought that stuff. And it was down in our basement. Whatever happened to it, I don't know, but that's what he had. Well, anyway, they had that grocery store, Papa and Mama, and the milk business was going good. In the meantime, my cousin, what's his name? I forget his name, but Chausmer, came to Gruber, came to Papa with an idea to open a make liquor. And with Charlie.
You know, in other words, to have a still.
A still. Yeah, they had a still. And a distillery.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the license and everything on the side of the building, on Manufacturer's Place. It says the name of the name of the company, and it gave the number, gave everything,
License number.
everything there was to it there. And it was being sold and everything. In the meantime, a man and woman came along and they wanted to buy this here. And Papa and Mama were glad to get rid of it because it wasn't to their liking. And these people, I don't know where they came from, but by that time your mother and father had moved out of Ferry Street. I don't know if they sold it or what it was there, but they went to corner Bowery and Mott Street. And in back of the store, there was a kitchen, and upstairs there was bedrooms. And this man and woman stayed with your mother and father. It seemed they had children, but their children weren't there. And they came and they bought this business. Now, I don't know what the story was. They made a deposit, but it was a virtual business, a business with no lawyer or anything, just shook hands on it.
Verbal. Verbal agreement.
And he gave my father so much, whatever the amount was, I don't remember. I never did know. And he had the business. Mrs. Tuck was there, and she must have brought the man together. I don't know what it was, but she was there for some reason. And after the first payment and something, the man decided he wasn't going to pay anymore. That he wasn't. If my father wanted it, he'd have to sue him for it or whatever it was. In the meantime, he wasn't making the proper, you have to mark down how much stuff you use, whether you made it from apples or from dried fruits or for whatever you was. You had to record all that stuff. And Charlie took all of that stuff, how much liquor they made from so much stuff and everything. But when he sold it to them, he didn't do that anymore. These people supposedly did that. I can't think of their name. I may think of it later on. But anyway, and apparently they wasn't doing what they were supposed to do. And when the government got after them, they said they didn't own it. It wasn't theirs. And this was cash with a verbal agreement. And Papa says he didn't own it and he didn't have anything and he had no proof. But Papa says to Mrs. Tuck, you were there, you know it. Oh, yes, she knew all about it. Well, the case went down to Trenton because it was government distillery. And after paying for her to go down, when she got down there and they called her on the stand, she says, I don't remember. Maybe my husband remembers.
You mean Sarah Tuck?
Sarah Tuck. Yeah. And I don't know, Papa had to hire a lawyer. He got out of it. But it wasn't easy.
I don't imagine so.
It wasn't easy because I tell you when that happened. When Evelyn Thor Nesbitt, what was it? Evelyn Thor married Nesbitt Weiss, White. That's when that case was going on because Papa and Meyer and Charlie would go to Trenton in the morning and they didn't come home till dark. And we would stand at Otto Carr's corner because we didn't know if they were coming on the Plank Road or Ferry Street. So you understand that somebody else would. And with a big shawl, Mama and Jenny and I would stand there waiting, shivering with bitter cold, till we saw them to see what the outcome was, until that got through. Well, we were done with that there. Then somebody came along and about the charcoal business. They went in charcoal business and things started to go very good. So Meyer and Fanny got married, so Papa decided, didn't need the milk business anymore, that was Meyer's. See, Bella, they gave the grocery store, and that was Meyer's. And, of course, they knew that Fanny wouldn't milk cows, and Charlie was with the charcoal business, Navy and everything. There was nobody to milk. So they decided to sell the cows just to keep two for our own use, and they would buy milk, and they'd bring it, and Papa and Mama would bottle it and everything for Meyer. He lived upstairs. In the wintertime, they'd bring it in our dining room to defrost it because it was frozen, the milk, when they got it. And they took it out and they bottled it, and Papa and Mama, they washed the bottles and everything to make him make a living. And he kept that for a couple of years. He made out, he bought milk and sold it that way, and he made out all right. In the meantime, Papa went in the bundlewood business. And that didn't turn out so good. And then they went into the salt business.
That I remember.
And that wasn't too good. And meantime...
But they still had the charcoal.
They had the charcoal business. In the meantime, Mr. Carey, that was a millionaire, and Mr. Newman, and what was the other fellow, an Irish guy, I can't think of his name. They were in New York, and they thought that we were making a lot of money here. Well, we went into business, only Sam Decker had it from Harris. And Papa got together with Sam, and they used to control, let the price down or up. They didn't fight. They got the Hegemans they never could control in Irvington. But these New Yorkers wanted this business. So they started to squeeze, and they wanted. And Papa would go to New York with Charlie, and they didn't want to sell. Papa was making a good living. His children, Charlie, A.B., Eddie, they were all making a good living. But Mr. Carey died, and Mrs. Carey or called Papa to New York one time, and Papa went, and she stood face to face with him, and she says, "You will sell me the business, or I will sell charcoal for a penny a bag and put you out of business." He had no alternative. When he came home and told that there, Mama cried because she had suffered so much, and now she was making a good living that she was satisfied. They didn't. However, to make the long story short, they dickered back and forth. Didn't happen all of a sudden. It went on for a couple of months, and finally, they forced Papa. In the meantime, the charcoal business was very good if you had good shippers. We had from Risley Lumber Company, in Rockriff, New York. They used to manufacture alcohol from their wood, and that was left with charcoal. And their charcoal was light in weight. It was very profitable. But when we bought from down south, it was heavy. And we couldn't make a living from that there, but you had to keep both of them in order to go. The contract ran out, and they wrote to Mackenzie. That time you didn't telephone or anything. You wrote to Mackenzie, "We want to renew it, whatever the price, whatever they agreed on," and it sailed. Meantime, they forced us to sell. They came to our house on that Friday. E.B. Newman, he bought his son for $25,000 on the stock market. He bought him a seat. Remember?
I remember that 25,000.
Well, he bought that. There were such wealthy people at that time. We were paupers. Nothing. We thought we were good, making a good living, but we didn't have what they had. And we had to sell. And they wanted Meyer to sign, and they wanted Charlie. They didn't think about A.B. And A.B. easy to go from Newark to Brooklyn, without a car. It wasn't easy. But anyway, they did. They had to do it. It was a living, and they did it. And about 6 months later, this was very cold. Got to be in the summer. They couldn't do any business in Newark. They just died. I think my parents bought it back for a couple $100.
They did.
Maybe $2,000 or $3,000. The horses died. The wagons fell apart. There was nobody
to run.
There was no boss. They had nobody to run it. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So Mrs. Kerry, she called Kerry, Kerry. She called up and they settled it and they got it back. And of course, then they were in business again. And then they nursed Brooklyn as long as they could, but it never amounted to too much. And they were back in Newark again. Well, everything went fine in Newark. In the meantime, the boys were investing in property and real estate and different things. And the charcoal got to the point, A.B. ran the movies. Meyer had real estate,
Well,
and
Joe
Charlie.
Joe didn't have any part of that either.
He was a young boy.
Yeah,
He was very
He
young.
went to school.
He was going
Yeah.
to school. He was
Yeah.
young. And in the meantime, they was doing this here, and there was nobody to run the charcoal business. If one wanted to run it, they could have made a living.
Mm.
But Eddie didn't want to, and they gave it away. I don't think they sold it to anybody.
They did it?
They just gave it away. And before that, when they went in the charcoal business again, the second time after they came back from Brooklyn, they went into grinding. Because now they use it for medicinal purposes. That time they was too. As long as we were in the charcoal business, we never had a fire until we started to grind the charcoal.
I remember that shed burning up.
A couple of times. I remember from the bedroom you saw the
Yeah,
flame.
yeah.
It seems as though, do you remember here a couple of months ago that where the big grain things
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
fine
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
they had the fires.
The grain.
That's what happened with our charcoal. It burnt down once, they rebuilt a bigger one,
Yeah.
and it burnt down, and that was the end. We
Yeah.
didn't do any grinding. But they did a very good business on that grinding, whatever they used it for. They made a very good living on that there.
Okay.
Yeah. So then they were in the charcoal business, but there was nothing to, and they went into the real estate business.
Yeah.
And then, at the end of, that was the end of it.
Yeah.
Now we go back to my mother's side of the family.
Yeah.
I didn't tell them. I told you off the record, didn't I, about my mother being the first child born to her? father and
Well,
mother.
yeah, but
After the older one,
yeah,
he was
you
married, had adult children. My mother's father.
Your mother's father. 'cause
My
you're
mother's
getting it-
father.
Your mother's father. His name was what?
Wait a minute. Moshe.
Moshe Gruber.
Yeah, wait, let me make sure. Was it? Yeah, sure he was Shlomo Nabish's father,
Yeah.
sure.
Moshe Gruber was your
My
mother's
uncle. My mother's brother.
Yeah, but your grandfather is on your mother's side. What was his name?
Leib Gedalia. Pardon me, I got a belch. Oh, pardon me.
Okay.
Leib Gedalia was my
Gruber.
father. Gruber.
Gruber.
And my grandmother was Bella. Bella.
Bella Gruber.
That's
that
right.
was your grandmother.
Your mother was named
Okay.
after her.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the meantime,
And they had how many children? They had,
the first one, the oldest one. Then they had my mother.
well, that was Margaret.
And then
Miriam.
Nathan.
Wait a minute.
Margaret,
Miriam. Because I never knew her name.
Oh, yes.
Margaret.
Margaret and Nathan,
Nathan.
and Sarah and Esther.
Sarah and Esther.
That's what they had.
That was Gruber. That
was
Gruber.
Gruber.
That was your
My mother's
mother.
father and mother.
And
that was my
was
father's
it.
side. Those are the ones my father and mother brought to America
Yeah.
later on. Oh, and then they brought Yankel, they brought Schleimer,
Well, they were
brought them all.
cousins.
Cousins, they
They were
brought them
cousins.
all. And
But your grandmother lost all the children until
she
grandma.
couldn't conceive. She conceived,
Yeah.
but she couldn't carry them through. And if she did, if they were born, they lasted a couple of months or a year and died.
Yeah.
Until finally, mind you, it was such a big difference that the oldest one was married by the time my mother was born. That was a long time, but she couldn't conceive. She apparently was very young
Yeah.
because otherwise she couldn't have done that there.
Yeah.
And then she had these children one after another because
Yeah.
she could. But that was the first that she could.
And she had to wear white
My mother wore white linen the whole 7 years.
for 7 years.
Yes. And then after that she could be dressed in anything. She apparently was all right.
That was a
But when she was so very sick and they gave her a name,
yeah.
my grandmother was afraid she was going to lose her too, like the others, but she persisted, and after that she had all the other children. So that was the big difference there. And of course my grandmother died with hasty consumption. Did I tell you this here?
Yeah.
Did I record it, I mean?
Yeah.
I did? She was the business lady. He made the money, but she was the business lady.
Well, she was not
a money lender, whatever.
Yeah.
She took care of his finances.
She was a
took of it.
financier.
That's right. He gave it to her, and she invested it, and she did everything, the dealing.
So on
on
Grandma's side, they were quite well off.
both sides,
Both sides.
both sides, until her mother died, until his father died.
Yeah.
That's what happens in a family. When the father or mother dies, then they were not with much. However, my father married my mother. She was very young, and she went to the city to live with him. And my father's sisters, he had sister-in-laws. They made fun of my mother because she didn't know no Chausmer. She was a booster, and after all, from her mother, she was 12 years old, and she saw the way her mother cooked and carried on. And came Pesach, and they were talking about making food or something, and she says an election, potato, election. So he says, how can you make election? How? So she made election. They couldn't get over it. They thought that she was terrible spendthrift to spend so much money for
on
that.
eggs.
But she had good times already with my father from this tavern that they had. You understand? So, and she had plenty of milk and cream and cheese, and she was not lazy.
No, well, I remembered in Vincent Street all the cheese and the
Cream.
the
She was not
and-
lazy. Some people were
Yeah,
lazy. They didn't
yeah.
want to do it, but she was not lazy. She did it. Yeah. Now, the same thing with now where they have this here, what is this they call
Yogurt.
yogurt? I don't know if you remember the big crocks Mom used to have on the end of the stove.
Yeah, well, what
at
was
the end
that?
of the
That was-
stove.
That was that made cheese.
Yeah, if you let it for cheese, but if you got it before that there, it was like yogurt.
Oh.
And we didn't take it. My mother would take a glass of it.
Yeah.
With a knife, a spoon,
Yeah,
you'd take
yes,
it,
yeah.
and she would drink it. Fred used to come, and she used to give him that there. Fred used to love it, Herman Baum. But none of us ever drank that, and that was yogurt. And I didn't know. I thought cheese was cheese. Till the Dicks, they knew because they used to come and get cheese from
Yeah.
Mama. But when I got married, and when I'd go home back to Hoboken, Mom would give me a whole cheese. And I didn't, what did I want that cheese for? I gave it to my mother-in-law. They loved that cheese because they could tell the difference. I didn't know the difference. But we had everything, plenty of everything, because my mother wasn't lazy. Had our own eggs, milk, butter, cheese.
Because she was brought up on a farm in the
That's
country,
right.
and she knew how to do all that
Right,
stuff.
that's right. And she was not lazy, and we did that there. And what else should we go into? Let me hear. I'm lost. Turn it off for a minute, Sarah. Okay. As soon as Papa started to make a living from the charcoal business, he decided he wanted $1 million. It was too far to walk to Prince Street. So he hired Jews. And there was no Jews living downtown at that time. But they all wanted to work that time, and they came to work. And the Greenhorns all came to work for Papa. Hirsch Bitterman, Elia Bitterman, Beryl, Shoal.
Well, they were all related.
Sure, they were all related. He
cousins?
brought them all here and gave them jobs, but with the understanding that they had to live by, because he wanted $1 million Friday night and Saturday. He went for the entitlement. And then for the entitlement, he hired a cousin, used to come in a hall or in a store or whatever, and they had $1 million, because it was so far to walk, till they made Jefferson Street sure. But they never went to Jefferson Street sure. They never did. They never did. So
And they fixed up their house.
in the dining room, they had $1 million for during the week. It was only for the entitlement that they went to another place. And we had $1 million. And then they decided to, Moshe Gingold, he was educated and everything, Belia Lerner, Pete Sass, all these people. And they used to have, and like Goldman, Jake Goldman. And they used to get together for Saturday night. And they always, Mama's birthday for this, they looked for something. And then everybody in the neighborhood used to come there for a bris, for anything, or what's his name, the fellow lived down on, they call it the island, his name, I forget his name.
Street.
Yeah, he lived down there. His twin daughters were born. They came to Mama's house to name them. Minnie Barth was married in Mama's house. What's his name, Rosenberg's, he worked for the tallow factory. He drove a tallow truck, remember? Standard Tallow, and his boys were bar mitzvahed in our house, and whatever happened.
Ben had his uproofing there.
He did? See, I don't remember that. That was after I was married. That was, that was...
Yeah, Ben was in the...
Yeah, and Rivka was born, so when she was named Rivka, Papa says, oh, my Schwester Schönisch, because he had a stroke already, and Mama didn't tell him. Yeah.
Well, but those were happy days.
We didn't know any different. You didn't get anything over the radio or over the television or anything. You waited for that North Evening News, and you sat outside. And you remember with the Indian nuts, 2 pounds for a quarter?
God.
Sarah, 2 pounds for a quarter. What do they cost now?
I don't even
Must be
buy
about
them.
$10 a pound, I guess.
I don't even buy them.
You remember sitting for hours?
I used to break them for Grandma because I couldn't eat them.
Yeah, but sitting on the stoop, and you took a walk at night from Vincent Street. Papa and Mama would come up to visit your mother.
With the dogs and the nanny goats.
And sit outside the saloon for a little while and walk back again. And Sarah, Papa wore a diamond ring and a diamond stud and diamond earrings Mama wore. And Mrs. Smith used to say that when she looked out the back, she could see the sun shining on Papa's diamond ring. Nobody attempted to rob them or hold them up, did they? No. We were in a different world, Sarah. Try and think of that.
Oh, I know.
Nobody broke into our house. Nobody robbed us. I used to come running from Ferry Street 2 blocks in on Sunday night when I went out with the girls. I'd run those 2 blocks down. Nobody ever bothered me. They ever bother you?
Never.
Never bothered us. Never.
Yeah, but it was different down there. We had farms down there. What was their name? Hanaway's?
Oh, Hanaway's down
farm.
there. Oh, and somebody, I forget the name of the other one. Boney Camper.
Yeah.
There was so many different things. There was Smith's Creek, and there was so many different, it was a different life. Different life entirely. That's why I said to my children, if they were living in Puerto Rico, I could live in Puerto Rico. I would adjust to it. But alone to live there amongst them, that wasn't for me. Not for me.
Well, that's it, I guess.
So you think I gave you enough? Didn't give...